Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am your moderator, Dr. Nancy Lawther, co-principal based in Miami. Thank you to all in attendance for joining us today. We're apologizing, we're a little bit late due to technical difficulties, but we are happy to see you for virtual Puerto Rico Day in the capital, as our distinguished panel considers a very pertinent topic: appropriations and nonprofits. I'm sure that our discussion will lead to a great many questions, which, for efficiency's sake, I will ask you to post in the chat. Before we begin, let's talk basics. Those entities that wish to receive state funding must approach a friendly legislator who will file a detailed appropriations request. That request may be approved by the legislature, often after a great deal of behind-the-scenes preliminary work by the entity and the sponsor to gain the favor of legislative leadership and individual legislators. Such proposals are subject to a great deal of scrutiny. Once approved for inclusion in the General Appropriations Act and passed with other elements of the budget, the relevant line item is subject to further review by the Office of the Governor. In Florida, the governor has line item veto power. Only after passing the veto hurdle can an appropriations request be funded and the entity receive state dollars. For now, let's meet our panelists, whom I hope will wave at you. Their impressive biographies you will find online. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ms. Zoe Colon, Mr. Tony Suarez, and Mr. Luis de Rosa. Mr. Suarez, my first question is for you. As someone who previously served in the Florida House of Representatives, what differences have you noted between the appropriations process at that point in time and what happens today?
Hi, can Luis answer?
Radio. Yeah, since Tony was mentioned, but I do know from my personal experience, if I may speak from there, is that it is a difficult process, but it can be done. Unfortunately for Puerto Ricans in the state of Florida, we don't have sufficient amount of political clout in the legislators, in the House and in the Senate, and that's an issue that we need to address in order to be able to move our individual projects, our community projects, our capital improvement projects forward with support from those that understand our needs and where we're heading as a community. But it is a relationship. Everything comes down to your relationship with your legislator and also with the leadership. Who is the leadership? I mean, and what are their interests? Because if it doesn't pass the leadership, it's not going anywhere, as we all know. It's easy to go through, it's passed all the time, but when it gets down to the final analysis, only specific projects that are supported by the leadership actually gets funded, because there's money that comes from the state capital. So it's really guarded by the leadership and of course the governor. So, in large part, it has to do with your relationship. You have to know your legislators. You have to develop a relationship that is functioning, that is continuing throughout the years, and not just a one-time approach. I can tell you from my personal experience, real briefly, if I may, when Maria hit Puerto Rico and devastated the island and created such a mass exodus, as we all know, due to survival needs for our community, we Puerto Ricans on the mainland, in particular Florida, gather our support. Zoe was very, very instrumental with her work and her role in the Central Florida area, and I was very proud of her work. We were able to. I was able to go to a Republican state senator and a Democratic state House rep to request funding for a Hurricane Maria Puerto Rico relief project in South Florida, and it went nowhere. And you would think, with all the suffering, all the challenges, the influx of people coming into Florida, they would have in their heart, and it was the leadership that stopped it. It wasn't the rep or it wasn't the senator. They pushed it through, and the leadership decided that it was not in their interest to spend state funds on a Puerto Rico Maria, relief effort. So it is a relationship. You need to start early. You need to gather your army, your forces, your supporters. You need to make phone calls. You need to send emails, and you need to go to meetings and to make sure that it is a project that they can support. And also a project that is relative to the state budget to some degree, helping the constituents, community health fair, community outreach. I don't know if the voters get out to vote is going to get anywhere because, everyone's concerned about that in particular. But we as a community, if I may just end with this, is that we have to start electing, start identifying, getting Puerto Ricans elected to the state house and the state senate. That's one way, and I believe the only way we're going to move our community agenda forward.
Thank you for stepping in there. We're having a few technical difficulties that remain. Ms. Colon, you were just praised to the skies for your efforts, and you have dedicated considerable time for fighting for the rights and needs of the underserved in a legislative arena where deep-pocketed special interest groups have grown more influential since the imposition of term limits, and where affordable housing and health care have often taken a back seat to other priorities. How have you managed to make your voice, and therefore the communities that you represent, their voices?
Thank you. Happy to be here today. Can you all hear me okay? Just before I move on. Okay, wonderful. So the nonprofit sector is one that I've dedicated my career and life to, because oftentimes you end up just serving 24/7. But I do want to start with highlighting how critical nonprofits are in advocating for marginalized communities across the nation, and especially in a state like Florida, where there's limited funding for nonprofits, and particularly for nonprofits that are Hispanic, Puerto Rican led. So as we've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of critical movements, immigration reform, those are often led by nonprofit organizations, grassroots organizations. And I just wanted to start with that. I think many of us on this event today know how critical the nonprofit sector is, and that we've helped, kind of fill the gaps wherever we can, but we're severely under-resourced, right? And in states like Florida, where we're fast growing, we're still not at the table to have many of these discussions. But as we, confront crisis and try to respond to families in crises as it relates to housing, even now getting, communities of color to understand, the vaccine, the importance of the vaccine, meeting, people where they are as far as their basic human needs during this pandemic, and helping people bounce back from the economic recession, which we know has disproportionately affected our communities. That's when we come front and center, right? That's when people start to realize, and even the media, slowly but surely, oh, this, small grassroots organization or this church, was able to secure 250, 500 vaccines to make sure that folks on the east side of Orlando, for example, can get the vaccines, and, they can, eliminate, the transportation barriers and that kind of stuff. So that's where we become front and center. But when it comes to funding, unfortunately, we're still not, part, of that process, in proportion to what we should be, right? So for me, it's really important that we highlight for elected officials and for other providers the importance of our organizations, Hispanic, Puerto Rican-led organizations, in serving our community. We are trusted, we're bilingual, we're bicultural. Oftentimes we set up shop in the community or immediately surrounding the community, right? Not in your local downtown, for example. And we speak in arroyo habichuela, as they say, right? Like, people understand us. I recall after the shooting at Pulse and that that terrible tragedy, being a volunteer among at least 30 other volunteers that were set up, at the Amway Center to receive folks that had questions about how they would be compensated and that kind of thing. And I recall almost everyone coming to me, it must be, la mancha de gandula de plátano, and people coming to me and say, finalmente veo una cara hispana. And that's important for our community. So, it's important for us to highlight, and provide insight to mainstream organizations and elected officials on how important our communities are in serving, and our organizations, in serving our folks, right? So the way that I do this work is I'm constantly advocating for increased funding for our organizations, not just with funders, but influential organizations. Back to what Luis was saying, it's about your relationships. And oftentimes we're siloed, right? So, we are either intimidated, or maybe language barriers, whatever the case may be, cultural barriers, where we're like, okay, what do I have to offer this mainstream large organization that's well-resourced? We have a ton to offer, right? So advocating for a place at those tables and to be part of those conversations, but also to be part of the decision-making process as well. I lend my own expertise in different ways. I volunteered to do capacity building trainings for nonprofit organizations. I also have a consulting business where I actually help nonprofits with the appropriations application. It has changed. It's actually a lot more formal, even in the 6 years that I've been in Orlando. So I have noticed that change. And there are 2 applications. And again, back to those relationships, as Luis was saying, and I'm sure Anthony Suarez would stress, it's about having, the right allies. And it's not always the usual suspects. It's not always, the Latino legislators. It's also people that really believe in your mission, but they won't know about your mission unless you're front and center and you're constantly, providing that insight and that knowledge about our population, the demographics, our needs, and also our strengths, right? So oftentimes when I meet with mainstream institutions, not Latino-led, I talk about how so many of our Puerto Ricans are coming in with credentials. People, have, experience in management and have their degrees. It's not just folks that need. It's people that can offer and can help boost the local economy, right? So that's really important in our narrative and how we speak about our community. I've joined numerous of Hispanic-led coalitions because it's important to know what issues are important, what progress we've made, right? Because it's important to talk about not just, again, the needs and our issues and our problems, but also what progress we've made so that we can present those to people that have the influence to fund our organizations. And as I said before, so important, to urge mainstream coalitions and organizations to include us and to fund us, right? So there are opportunities to partner with large organizations. It may be really tough, but the more of us that there are at, saying the same thing, the more likely they are to listen, right? And, inviting them to, collaborate with us on, proposal to the state or other funders. And I can keep going, but I'll stop there because I know you have more questions.
And yes, actually, I'm going to bring in Luis on this because you have done a lot of coalition building. You have sought to bring together the Puerto Rican diaspora across the state of Florida. How can the community at large support nonprofits in their quest to receive receive funding.
Please turn.
Is that question for Luis? Luis, I think you're muted.
Luis, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm a dinosaur, so you gotta bear with me. I'm from Evergreen Avenue.
We actually grew up on the same street.
Yeah, we're
Different
from the
time,
same
but same street
different
in the
times,
Bronx.
but this challenge here in Florida has brought us together on some level. We have collaborated in the past, and Zoe has done a great job, and she's a good leader and a good professional, and I'm very proud to have a relationship with her. But I'm thinking now that we as a community have come to realize, or should come to realize, that not only do we have a structure in our nonprofit, apparatus, the finance committee, the bylaws committee, we need to start thinking, establishing a government committee also. And the government committee's job is to really advocate, educate, if you want to use that word, because otherwise they'll use it against us if we take it in another direction. We want to educate the powers to be on the needs and the benefits of through the appropriation process, and the benefit of supporting nonprofits on a grassroots level, and how that would not only save money onto the government coffers, but also would help the elected officials push their agenda, or at least collaborate and show that they're doing something for the community. But we have to have a committee in place. All nonprofits should have a government relations committee. And that government relations committee job is to educate the powers to be, the elected officials, on the goals and the necessities of collaborating with the communities at large. And it's really saving the state and saving the cities and the counties money by putting funds into nonprofits. So the collaboration through the Summit on Puerto Rican Affairs, which Zoe was part of back when she was with the Hispanic Federation, and one of the sponsors, one of the supporters, because we need money to make it happen and make it affordable for our attendees, was to bring, regardless of your political affiliation, the Republicans like the Tony Suarez's of the world, and the Democrats like the Louis DeRosas of the world, even though I go on both sides, but I do it to the extent that it benefits, the mission. I don't, our position is that we need to somehow find that common ground where we can move our agenda forward. So the summit came together for that purpose, from folks from Orlando, from Jacksonville, from Tampa, from Miami, from Puerto Rico, from New York, and for us to have a discussion how we can find a common ground to start moving our agenda forward. And I'm happy that the Hispanic Federation has taken this responsibility with Puerto Rico, Tallahassee there. That's very important for us as well. But so it is a collaboration. We got to come together. We're growing as a community. We come from different backgrounds. I'm a New York-Rican, just like Zoe. And there are many folks that are, from the island. There are many folks that come from, who happen to be Puerto Rican, I'm referring to, who come from Chicago, wherever the case may be. Yes, we have different points of view. We with La Patria, we believe in Puerto Rico, civil rights, and maybe down the road, we got to start marching also. We got to have Puerto Rican lives matters too, down the road. Who knows? Maybe we're going to have to get to that point so we can wake up the powers to be. The Cuban American community, the Jewish American community, they have learned the process of collaboration, of educating, promoting, putting money where their mouths is, are, and we have to do that as well as a community. So we're growing.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Zoe. Go ahead, Zoe.
No, I'm sorry, Luis. Yeah, if I may also just allude to the process of getting the appropriations and the relationships really quickly. It's not with the folks that are not just with the folks that are sponsoring, your appropriations application. So you need a sponsor on both sides of the house. But once it's in, the governor can veto. So actually, when I was with the Hispanic Federation, we were able to get it in. So we were sponsored by then, that time, Senator Darren Soto, and who Democrat, and then we had I forget Bob Cortez on the Republican side as a House representative who supported the appropriations application and actually made it into the budget which was, I think, the first time in a very long time, if not ever, that a Hispanic-led, Puerto Rican-led organization was included in the budget on both sides. And then it was vetoed. Right. And so I learned through that process that while I was in contact with the governor's office, I mean, you need to build that relationship long term, way before that session starts. So there's just a lot of relationship building. Like you said, you know, having a committee or a designated person, even if it's a volunteer, because you can't afford to pay someone that's interested in legislation and policy, to really take, you know, the bull by the horns and say, OK, I'm going to focus on developing these relationships with the governor's office and with you know, legislators that can help sponsor us for appropriations. And again, really try to be creative and think outside of the box and not just the Latino legislators. I mean, I think that's powerful to have them there to advocate for us, but it's not always a strategy to get into the budget, you know, if I may say that. So I'm sorry for interrupting, but wanted to note that.
Good point. Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, you have more experience than that I do. That's for sure.
Excellent point. And actually, I am going to, for both of you, ask you to turn the clock back 3 years. And in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, which is certainly a transformative event for the island and for Florida, Florida has seen a huge influx of new residents moving in from Puerto Rico, and many have chosen to stay. Nonprofits sprung up in order to serve their needs, and nonprofits that were already on the ground here expanded their functions. What, in your experience, has been the record of success for such entities, either the ones that were newly created or ones that expanded their scope in receiving state funding? And if you could turn the clock back 3 years, what recommendations would you make to improve upon that record? Question for
Luis, I think you have more experience with this.
Yeah, we, you know, it was a very sad time for many of us in Florida, as you can imagine, seeing folks on the island. You know, my father retired, lives in Ponce, and my wife's family are from Caguas and Cabo Rojo. And it was a very sad time for many of us. But we really came together as a community. We and Robert Asensio was part of that effort here in the Miami area, and Zoe was really very active in the Central Florida. So we had two major markets that with heavy Puerto Rican concentration, and folks that were from the island were coming in. To some degree covered, you know, a lot of the elected officials, you know, Bob Cortez, and Zoe mentioned when he was a legislator back then, he also sprang into action as well. Tony did a great job as well. We all came together, you know, we kind of forgot that we, you know, Republican, Democrats, PNP, Populares, we said, hey, this is time for us to unite on a mission to serve and help our fellow Puerto Ricans. You know, I didn't have too much of a success from Tallahassee because they have their political agendas over there, and they only think about their politics, and they disregarded the growing Puerto Rican community in a dire need at that time. But we came together along with Borinquen Medical Center and here in the Miami area, and then Zoe can talk about Central Florida. We set up an apparatus of various nonprofit organizations. We got the for-profit business, a fellow by the name of Moshe Manor, who loaned us a 35,000 square feet warehouse that we kept for donations. We got the airlines involved. We got American Airlines. We have, we were able to raise local funds. Honestly, the local commissioners, a lot of the Cuban commissioners who were helped by Puerto Ricans, when they left Cuba, they ended up in Puerto Rico or New York or New Jersey. And who was there? The Puerto Ricans are the ones that welcomed them and helped them get established. And we went to the county commission. We raised about $200,000 from the commissioners, so we can provide, you know, food. We can provide gift cards. We can help people settle, pay rent, pay the hotel. And we shamed Governor Scott back then to get active and get proactive and help us. And a lot of the nurses and doctors that were coming from Puerto Rico looking for work, you know, the governor waived the credentials that it was required, you know, here in Florida. So we did a lot. We didn't get enough traction because we were not organized on a statewide level. We don't have enough, elected officials supporting our agenda. And our agenda is an American agenda. It's about, helping families help themselves, paying the mortgage, sending kids to college. This is our agenda. It's like everybody else's agenda. It's just with the new
Yeah.
kids on the board. So it's been very difficult for us. But, we're learning.
Yeah.
We're Hispanic Federation now. We're coming together.
Right.
The Senate is coming together, and the leadership is coming together. And hopefully, we'll keep this dialogue moving forward.
One thing I want to add to what you're saying is that Governor Scott in Central Florida and other parts of the state set up a kind of hub for services like FEMA, right? I forget what it was called, at the airports, right? And so I think that was a great idea, because you're getting people literally right off the plane. Not all nonprofits were included, but Latino leadership was, which is wonderful, and some others. But it was heavily government. And that could be a very scary, process for people that don't necessarily trust government or haven't had much, interaction, or are just arriving. So literally like, oh my God, what do I do? Is this appropriate? Does this make sense? But that just shows you, I think, what's been happening for a long time in the state of Florida is that government is front and center when it comes to providing services. And we need to change that, right? So if you look at northeastern states, Chicago, in the mid, states, whatever the middle of the United States, and other hubs for Puerto Rican migration historically, there are a ton of well-funded organizations that are Puerto Rican and Latino led that really help in times of crisis like that, right? And they partner with government to do so. Whereas in Florida, I'm seeing a lot of, well, we do that already, therefore there's no need for you to duplicate our services. And it's not one and the same. And it has been used as an excuse not to fund us, and that's a problem.
If I could just add something to that, Nancy, and I'm glad Zoe just reminded me, because I'm at that stage of my life that I tend to forget things. I was successful, believe it or not, to meet with the mayor at that time, who's now Congressman Jimenez, a Republican, and he brought FEMA, he brought the local hospital, Jackson Memorial Hospital, he brought all the medicals and all the regular, the agencies that are there to help people so they can help themselves, to meet with us. And here I'm in a meeting with 15 or 20 participants, and we put together a committee, and the hospitals accepted folks from Puerto Rico and did major operations and medical services to them. And of course, Borinquen Medical Center took up the charge of doing the research and also helping people with with their medical needs as well. And we got FEMA involved, and we got housing funds, and we somehow made it happen because we, like Zoe said, we made them. We understood that they were providing a service, but without our collaboration, it was not going to get done because of the fear and the concerns of people arriving from the island. This is there were folks that never been in the United States arriving, and that was very difficult for them at that time. So that's a very good point that Zoe's bringing to the discussion. And Tony, survived, because Tony has the Republican leadership relationships. We're going back to the relationships. He has the Democratic, relationships also. And he's,
Right.
And Governor Scott really helped him and funded the Puerto Rican legal clinic, which is, thank God for that. It provided a service. And he knows the process. The process is relationships.